Hey guys, hope you are doing well. My name is Josh from Juice Labs. Welcome to Juicy Conversation. Juice Labs is a tech community here in Vancouver, bringing creatives together to equip them with the insights and resources from industry experts. So since last week, we've been starting a series of conversations to check in to see how creatives are adjusting to the new norm and seeing what they're doing to thrive. So as usual, please use the chat on YouTube on the side if you want to ask any questions, and then we'll open up for Q&A at the end. So, all right. So tonight we have a special evening. My guests are Julie Tremblay and David Kohler. They're the founders of Hyperminds, along with Karina as well. They're an exciting brand and culture transformation agency. Their mission is to help companies unlock their performance potential by weaving brand and culture into a single guiding force. So guys, please welcome Julie and David. All right. One moment, I'm gonna switch over here. There you go.
Leave you.
All right, guys, welcome.
Thank you.
Josh.
So so glad to have you guys on board. David, some of our people don't know you, so we're really glad that you're here just to share what you have to share. So maybe for now, if you guys can just share a little bit about yourselves, and then we'll get right into it.
After you, David.
Okay, good. So my name is David Kohler. I'm an educator, trainer, culture and kind of people specialist, and I don't know, what do I want to tell you today? I want to tell you that I'm here in Vancouver, working from home and my office, and that I'm delighted to be here today. And if you don't know me, or it's the first time we meet, I'm originally from Switzerland. I've been here in Canada for about 13 years coming up. And what I'm really excited about is creating engagement with people, designing learning environments, designing conversation that has people look at what's authentically important to them. And I'm excited tonight that we get to talk about the work Julie and I and Karina and I are doing with Hyperminds.
Awesome.
Nice. And hi, everyone. I'm Julie Tremblay. I am a brand strategist, a culture consultant, and a UX designer. I have a background working in digital agency and also in education and in business operation management. And more recently, I've been taking on the initiative of launching Hyperminds with David and Karina. I'm originally from a tiny island in South Pacific. For those who don't know, New Caledonia. You can look it up on Google. Most people don't know that it even exists. So if you hear a bit of an accent, it's because I'm French, but I mainly grew up in Quebec. So I've been in Canada for most of my life and in BC since 2005. And what I'm really passionate about is, I really like, I know this is random, but I really like sports. I really like triathlon. So that's really been my thing in the past few years outside of work, really getting into swimming, cycling, and running. And professionally, really like finding ways to connect with people, connect with different organizations, and watch how we can deliberately create, like a culture that is authentic and enables people to reach their full potential. So when I was working in management, that's really what I was passionate about, was taking a look at my team and how can we work together to accomplish a lot. So that's something I've always been interested in. And with Hyperminds, I think a big part of what we're set out to do. So
that's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited. I think like the last 2 years, I've been really diving into brand strategy and everything. It's like a whole nother world. It's pretty amazing. And then also just diving into the whole culture thing. So I'm curious if you guys can share, like, how did you guys start Hyperminds? How did you guys decide to combine culture and brand, and how are you guys offering your services to other companies?
Sure, I can kick this off. So for me, it started a while back, right? So I actually have like an exhibit A here. In 2012, I read this book. It's called Start Something That Matters. And
cool.
Mikoski is the founder of Tom's, the shoe company that has a one-for-one model. Very comfortable shoes too, and they have just this like remarkable brand. And I remember going on the website, and it was really compelling to me, and that's why I bought the book. I wanted to read his story of like how he came up with it, and in reading his story as an entrepreneur, and learning more about how Tom's works, really discovered that this is really what I'm looking for professionally, is to work or create an organization that is exists to make a positive difference. And I've had the opportunity to, in my last the last place I work at, I like really was part of something that was up to something big like this, and it was so inspiring to see the team come together and attempt in like making that positive impact in the community.
Mm-hmm.
And in watching how that comes together, I start to notice more and more the relationship between um, the team's ability to reach their potential and for the organization to reach its potential. And the more performant the team is, the bigger the positive impact is in the community. And the way, if in the way that the customers or the, perceive the organization is also coherent with how the people inside the organization feel, then there's like this very powerful force that propels the organization forward, and their impact is even bigger. So with Hyperminds, that's really what we're wanting to accomplish, is to help companies align their image with how things work on the insides of the brand and the culture, so that it's authentically rooted in purpose, and so that they can have an even like larger impact and make a positive difference. So that's why I started, is because it really resonates with me on a deep level, is to this like value of authenticity and integrity.
Awesome.
What about you, David?
Well, it's not like I was looking for a new project, but when Julie and Karina came to me saying, look, we got this idea to help companies be more authentic and how they present themselves, how they work internally with their employees, align with their strategy, I just couldn't help to get interested. And um, I think the three of us came up with something really powerful, really interesting in today's landscape, because there's so much noise about creating a cool brand and telling people to sell yourself. You have to look this way, look that way. But the moment it's not authentic, the moment what's happening behind the curtains is not aligned to that, is the moment the plot is off. And you can make a buck, you can trick people into your product, but it's not going to be sustainable economically for you, and it's definitely not going to be an organization or a company that's an active member of the ecosystem and making a difference in the world. So contributing what I know and my personal professional expertise to this project, and working with the beautiful work Julie and Karina do in branding, it's just such an interesting, appealing opportunity. And well, here we are, and we launched a week and a half ago, and
Yeah,
it's just
congrats.
to work with them on that.
That's awesome. So, yeah, like how did you guys come about to define like combining, I guess, like the data analytics and all that stuff too, and like how did you figure out how to offer certain services to companies or agencies?
It's been such a great experience working in collaboration with David and Karina in in an office with a whiteboard. We've spent quite a bit of time just like brainstorming and wanting to create something that's quite unique. And we're complete nerds, I think, when it comes to like to those topics, and it's been amazing to watch our process of really like diverging, like our thinking in like combining different existing frameworks and then reconverging it towards something that feels concrete and solid and unique based on our combined experience.
Yeah.
So for the past few months, it's really been a lot of that, us hanging out in the room, brainstorming, whiteboarding, and then like putting in the effort to like, okay, it's nice to talk and it's nice to generate ideas, but how do we put this into action?
Right.
And so learning to like stop ourselves when we like see ourselves going like too wild in our creative process, and like reconverge it to make it tangible and like throw it out to the world, and then actually like moving forward with launching a business. And then I think like, and maybe David can speak to this, but a lot of it was a combination of our backgrounds, right? So I don't know, maybe I'll hand it off to you, David.
And I think more than the background, right? Looking at where we are at in the economy, with the kind of knowledge economy we live in, if what you're working on is not driven, not just backed by, but driven by data, it is not going to go anywhere. You got to function with feedback. Whether you get qualitative or quantitative data depends a little bit on what you're working on, but you can't just work in an empty, I feel like doing this, so I think that might be good for you. I think today people realize that we have access to assessment technologies that give us reliable data, and then we can do the work to use that data to inform the work we do. So that part about doing something that's data driven was just a no-brainer, and applying it to something that most people are not familiar with, which is not just branding, but that piece on culture. And the intersection of the two of them is where we thought not only that we had the skills for filling that gap, but that gap is mostly left unaddressed. In the conversation I have with other consulting companies and management consultants or whatever, a lot of people are working on strategy. A lot of people are working on change. You can hire yourself amazing um, branding or marketing companies, but this piece about aligning how you work externally with your customers, how you present yourself as an organization to your customers, and then looking at the same time at how you're working internally, how do you operate, which is really how we define culture, gives you that powerful edge where you're aligned with your strategy and who you are for your customers internally. It's all the same thing. It's smooth and it gives you a shot at putting a message out and having it deliver.
If I can even build on that,
Mm-hmm.
Karina and I's background is in design, right? And so we've really seen and understand the importance of building design solutions from data, from doing research, and from having insights into what like the end user, whatever it is that we're designing, is going to be. What do they need? What are they experiencing, and how do we craft a solution that will address those needs. So there's a big component of design in our approach as well, and really understanding principles of human-centric design, and like taking that approach to conducting like different methods to gather that data, and understanding that that's what will enable us to then like plan the approach, and then like implement like design and implement a solution, and then reevaluate it. So that's again like it's just like the data like feeding back into what the next iteration of the solution might be. And that's, I think, what's in certainly in the world of marketing, is something that is common to some degree. You'll get a lot of like marketing campaigns that are, or like like marketers that will do some focus groups and of course some market research as they like brand a product or a service. But in the world of culture, perhaps not as common, right? So a lot of, I think, culture consultants will have a like different approach to bringing their services to organizations. So bringing the two together is feeling quite tangible and solid for us in a way that will enable us to measure the difference that the offering makes as well.
Interesting. I was wondering, like, what are some main metrics that you guys look for like internal culture stuff, as opposed to like external marketing, like lead generations and all that.
Yeah. So when it comes to internal culture, it's not as simple as, well, here's the three things you look at. But essentially, what you want to do is, I mean, the first part of the work was to make culture tangible. When you read out there about what do people even mean about organizational culture, you often get stuff like, ooh, it's the vibe in the office. It's how many free beers you hand out,
Right.
or whether or not you celebrated the birthdays of each and every member of staff. So the first part of the work was to make culture tangible by saying that let's not call any of that culture, that stuff I just said, ping pong and whatnot, um, or values on the wall. Let's call culture the ways in which people work with each other.
Okay.
And by ways of working, what I mean is that the four main aspects of working with each other is how we communicate, how we make decisions, how we solve problems, and how we resolve conflicts. So now you have something more tangible you can work with. How do we communicate? And then, depending on the organization, the size of which, you can start tracking some metrics. So if you have a large organization and, for example, you have access to all of the emailings and sort of a task management system, you can start getting some really hard measures of, tracking how many tasks in a Asana type or Trello. How many of these tasks are actually fulfilled on time? How many times do they get rescheduled and passed around the buck? How many times do you have tasks that were left alone until the last second? When you have smaller organization, you can do the same work. It just becomes a little more qualitative. You have to go and talk to people, do some interviews, but you're looking at what's happening, for example, with communication. Or when you ask people about when to find information, do they know or do they not know?
Right.
How do they go about sharing when they hear about something interesting? How many companies it's like one person knows about a problem, but because it's not their business to look at that, they just go, yeah, well, that's a problem with sales. I mean, I'm not in sales. What do you want me to do about it? Like that tells you, and you can quantify these things. That starts tells you about the culture the company has, what's actually going, and that's just an example with communication. And then you can start doing this work about problem solving. Like with problem solving, you can start looking at how many times are we solving the same problem throughout the organization again and again and again. Even in small groups of 3, 4, 5, 10 people, you have these things like, oh, everyone has written their own template for emailing the clients, and there's 17 templates lying around, all slightly different, and everyone's a little pissed off about which one to use. That starts to tell you about inefficiencies in the culture, and that's the kind of stuff you can measure.
And that's, like developing this set of micrometrics is what makes the understanding of culture a lot more tangible, because for a lot of management teams inside organizations, they'll look at higher level like business metrics or like set of HR metrics like employee engagement, turnover, or like absenteeism, or like there's like these like higher level like key metrics like time to hire. Like how do we break this down in a way that's like that enables us to like get in there and like work with the team to improve those at a more micro level, so that these higher level metrics like employee engagement that feels so intangible, and like it can be really overwhelming as a manager or as a business owner if you're looking at your staff and you know that they're disenchanted and you're like, well, where do I start? Because everything is interconnected, right? It's such a wide metrics. It's such a wide metric. So this is what we do. We get in there and take a look at crafting out some like more like hands-on, tangible way to have pulse on what is actually happening and where the dysfunctions are, areas of improvement, and work with the teams to develop that.
Wow. I mean, I can only imagine that the engagement with your clients is like a couple weeks or a couple months. It seems like you can really unpack it a lot. Before we kind of dive even deeper, I was wondering if you guys can just define what is organizational culture, and then also what is branding, because I know they're kind of vague. And David, you're kind of explaining that like culture is basically the bulk of it is communication, right? So what I'm hearing is it's like organization culture is almost like organization of the communication. Is that kind
Not
of
quite.
related?
I want to expand that a bit more. I was
Yeah.
looking at communication as one aspect. I
Yeah.
think you pretty much got it. It's just more to the picture. Um, the way we look at it is organizational culture is how people work with each other. Communication is one of them. But the other three that I would want to look at is problem solving, which is distinct than communication. So communication is one, two is problem solving, three is conflict resolution, and four is decision making. The order doesn't really matter. I think I scrambled it a couple of times, but it's these four items. The order doesn't matter. Because if you think about it, behind the free beers, the ping pong tables, the values on the wall, the way we celebrate birthdays, all of these are artifacts that fundamentally speak to what kind of communication do we have in this organization? What kind of ways do we go around solving problems? See, for a lot of companies, like just the idea of having to organize, say, a birthday party is just an example of how they solve problems. So the birthday party itself is not the thing, but how people go about solving the problem called how and when and to what extent are we going to celebrate people's birthdays? There's problems there to solve, and looking at that will tell you more about the culture than whether or not birthdays are celebrated. So that's problem solving. And then conflict resolution, that's a big, big deal. In a lot of organizations, there's essentially no structure, and it tells you a lot about the discomfort. And that can't be, if you have an organization that has values such as courage and contribution and collaboration, but the moment someone's a little pissed off with something, the method is, well, we'll let it bottle up until they either stop talking about it or they leave. It's just not aligned with your strategy. It's just not aligned with who you say to your clients you are. So it's not just about having a conflict resolution system, it's having one that's aligned with what do we say as a company we are here to, we exist for, and having the way we resolve conflict internally match how we talk to our clients, how we say we go about business. So communication, problem solving, decision making, and conflict resolution.
This is
And if
great.
you
I'm
look at
taking a
these
lot of
things,
notes.
that gives you a sense of that sort of our working definition for organizational culture that we think gives you something more tangible and workable you can play with.
Interesting.
And where it connects with brand is where it becomes really interesting, because we have the ability to anchor culture in the identity of the organization, right? So a lot of companies will have like a purpose statement and values. And so if the brand can also be an expression of those in all of the touch point, then the culture and the brand like feed off each other, right? So the brand inspires the culture, and the culture strengthens the brand. And with branding, similarly to how we took an approach to culture, branding is also often a concept that can feel overwhelming because there's like ambiguous, because there is elements of it that are less tangible and elements of it that are emotional even. So we also broke it down into 4 elements, right? So with branding, maybe the parallel, like it's not about like people thinking that culture is like, if I can compare it to like how people think culture is like beers and birthday cakes, with branding people think of logos and colors, right? Think about graphic design, and of course it's a huge part of it, and that's certainly one of the 4 components, the 4 dimensions of brand that we've identified. The visual identity of a brand is a massive opportunity for the organization to communicate through the visual language what the essence and the meaning, what the purpose and those values are, right? So for instance, if I have like, I'll pick a like very simple example, a company that works in recycling and global has like sustainability practices, um, there's good odds they're going to pick green as their color, right? And it makes
Right.
sense because in our culture we associate the two together, and that's a very basic example. But then of course it can get more sophisticated and complex in understanding like color theory and the psychology behind how people react emotionally and create they're compelled by certain visual systems that are well crafted with the intention to communicate uh, like a clear intent of communication, that is the purpose and the values. So
Right.
with visual identity being one of the four, but the other ones uh, are like the brand positioning, right? The brand positioning, the quality of the customer service and the messaging. So there's a big element of branding that is strategic when we think about positioning, is understanding the needs of the market and the needs of the customers, and formulating a narrative for the brand that is that addresses both, but is also true to the purpose of the organization. So
Hmm.
that's visual identity. Positioning with messaging is like, how do we use words and other forms of communication to really articulate a clear value proposition, or a clear like messaging that is aspirational and customers will want to engage with the brand because it's clear what's in it for them. So
Mm-hmm.
messaging is like a huge other component. And then the last one is like the customer service or the experience of the customers, right? So when we think about how if you go and eat at the keg, for example. I used to work there ages ago, and they were like training us to serve very like to utilize very specific language and to go about our service a very specific way that was on brand with the keg.
Hmm.
And they had developed an approach to customer service that was intentionally crafted. And I mean, there's so many examples of that, but that is definitely part of the brand experience. So those four elements are how we define the brand at Hyperminds: is the positioning, like the strategic positioning, the messaging, the visual identity, and the brand experience.
Wow, that's awesome. So what I'm hearing is, so how do they link? Because culture is more of like internal, and
Mhm.
branding more or less is like your external. It's the touch points of where your customers experience the company. So I'm curious, like, do you guys have like an inside out approach? Like, start with the culture first, and then it'll kind of exude out to the branding, the messaging. I'm curious how you guys would approach that.
I think they reinforce each other. Um, I have a personal preference for starting with the brand work, because the brand work more naturally aligns with the strategy. So you create a company,
Hmm.
you have an organization, it serves a certain purpose. Figuring out how you're gonna go about showing up for your customers or the people you serve, with these elements Julie just described, like the visual identity and the messaging you're going to go about to make that difference with them, or provide that need that's missing in the market, makes a
Mhm.
lot of sense. And then from there, truing your culture so that it's a match. If
Oh.
you see that in the like Spotify saw that in the market, what was missing was a really simple, effective, good streaming method, service for music, so that any music you ever thought about, you can go type and boom, you can listen to it. And
Hmm.
they knew they needed to be agile and be able to really quickly respond to the needs of the users. Like if the service seemed boring, or if the music was hard to find, or if the features didn't work, they knew they were going to lose users right away. So
Hmm.
they needed to create a product that communicated, we agile, we respond to things really quickly, and they created a product that, according to that, well, the culture Spotify has internally is aligned with that.
I
People
see.
work in small groups, in small teams, so they're agile, the work is distributed. And the culture, if you think about it, is a representation internally of the kind of product they need to have to win in the market and serve the customers,
Hmm.
as opposed to starting with a culture like, ooh, we should do beers on Friday. That's the company I want to create. And then let's figure out a product that we can sell. And then you're trying to like do, I don't know, tailoring goods. Like it just doesn't, how do you link beers on Friday with expensive suits? Just doesn't make any sense.
Huh. That's almost like I guess like a compromise just to kind of, I guess, cover their own internal needs to do it that way. That's interesting.
I think there's a lot of laziness where people do things they like and then they call it culture, as opposed to really being intentional. No, how do we need to work with each other so we deliver what we said we were going to deliver? And then
Mm.
you have a natural match, like here's the service or the product we create, here's the way in which we need to be with the client, which means here's the way we need to be with each other. If you're not wanting to work like that, you should go work somewhere else.
Wow. Yeah. That makes a lot of
And
sense.
also the in the nature of brand work, um, in my experience, I've often seen brand work that's done in a way that like includes like purpose statements and values and the mission of the organization, and then some brand work even expands into thinking about brand personality and
Hmm.
the voice of the brand. So when we think about that, it's like, well, all of a sudden we're already expanding from like perceiving the organization as something that is human or that has, like a soul and can behave a certain way, right? So if um, brand personality has attributes that you can describe, then these often like can also begin to inform a culture. So that's where we find it really interesting to begin with brand, because then we can brand your ways of working. In
Hmm.
that, like if like the organization has integrity as something that they've identified they need to communicate with their customers as part of their brand strategy, then how do we bring this in the ways of working so that when we do our weekly reporting, we have a practice in place that enables us to maintain integrity. So uh, and this, like, we're actually living the value and living that like the personality of the brand. So uh, for engagements where we start working with companies that don't yet have a brand established, we like to start with this and then
Right.
build on that and expand it into culture. And then for organizations that already have a strong brand established, we'll go in and offer our services in branding their ways of working. Essentially, is what we do. We're branding their culture, um, and and then we also, at the same time, we take a look at their brand and see if there's opportunities for them to strengthen their brand and share that with them as insights.
That's awesome. Can you guys give like any examples of like companies that make the most out of combining brand and culture, and how it's like connected to their purpose and how successful that is?
So there's some examples. Maybe we could talk it out, and Julie and I can bounce around with that. Um, I want to think about big organization people are familiar with, but also more local examples to also show that what it looks like at a smaller level.
Hmm.
Um, at a bigger level, I think one company we're all familiar with is Google. And there's something about the user experience of working with a Google product, whether it's the search engine or the Google Documents or Gmail, where they've done thorough work to, like, what's the experience? It's simple, it does exactly what you need it to do, and people have thought about what are your needs.
Mm-hmm.
When you look for something, it's there because someone did the thinking of, you might want to do this, so it's available. And when you look at the kind of internal culture Google has built and why people fight to work for Google, is because they have this culture where you get taken care of. Like, Google is famous for having, the buses to transport people and the napping pods or whatever got into the newspaper. But all that speaks to is they experiment as a company with their product. They keep innovating, but they also do it internally. Like they experimented with a napping pod. They experimented with a 30% free time for people to innovate at work. There's so many aspects of what does it look like to work for Google that matches the experience you have as a user. So
Mm.
that's one. I can talk about other organizations, but anything else you want to say about Google, Julie? Or
I think it's a great example, and like it links back to like the one of like I think Spotify is another great one.
yeah,
Um, the one that's top of mind for me right now is Virgin, and I actually shared some thoughts on that in an article we shared on our website if you're curious. But really thinking about how like the brand of Virgin really um, was born from like like the founder, so Richard Branson, his attitude towards life and work, in living a life of adventure has informed how they position themselves as an employer, is adventure as culture. And
Mm.
it shows for the customers as well, and that's why they choose Virgin, is because they have uh, unusual ways to go about customer service, and it like makes them stand out of the bunch, right? And so
Mm.
there's certainly an alignment there in how the like the culture was created from like the founders like purpose. That's the like and that became the brand of Virgin, and the culture, the corporate culture expanded on that, like from that, and then bled into like the customer experience. So there's certainly a lot of cohesion there between how the two inform or build or like strengthen one another. So I'd say that's another example. But I know, David, I know you had some like smaller, maybe like more relatable examples, because they're not these like major global companies.
Do
I
you
was
guys have
thinking
any
about
like local Vancouver examples?
yeah. So I was thinking about first, a small organization that's close to my heart is Options. Options for Sexual Health is essentially the BC Planned Parenthood.
Okay.
It's a nonprofit, and their mission is to provide sexual health to the people of BC. And they, if you think about it, they provide sexual health services. They are not-for-profit organization. Um, Innovation is not in their top values. That's not at all what, if you think about them versus Google, they
Mm-hmm.
definitely have a very different strategy about delivering their services. And it's based on a different set of values. And who they are externally and internally is the same thing. I mean, I know them internally really well. My wife works for them. She's the operations manager there. And there's something about how they treat their clients with dignity, respect, and care that's matched with how they treat with each other. As this whole experience of dealing with the coronavirus happened,
Right.
and they had to take care of their staff while providing sexual health services in the province. They they you could see that who they were being with their employees and with their partners was the same as what they do with their patients. They listen to the employees, what's happening with them, who feels safe, who doesn't, what do you need, and
Mm.
provided dignity for people to be able to both serve their patients, do their work, um, and do it with that respect and that care for people. I mean, the kind of emails I've had a little glimpse, and Helena shares with me about how proud the people internally are of the way the organization is responding
Mm.
matches the kind of emails they get from the patients about the kind of care they still get. And that kind of match where you get this email to acknowledge the service you provide, and you actually can't make the difference between that's a patient acknowledging us, that's an employee acknowledging us.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it looks like when you really align the user experience or customer experience with the employee experience.
It's interesting because I'm thinking like the way I'm kind of understanding is culture again, like you said. Well, if you start with brand, it's like figuring out uh, who's the who's the customer and I guess what their need is, and then from there, set up the logistics of the internal processes, which is makes up the culture, to in order to serve that. So if that's the case, it seems like yeah, culture is more of like the logistical like brain, like the how and the when, and then brand is a little bit different. So I'm just thinking like they would probably have different behaviors. Like you probably behave differently when you're working among staff, like the internal culture, as opposed to say externally with branding and the customer experience. So would well, anyways, that's how I'm receiving it, right? So like
Yeah, it's interesting. So
like but
yeah.
what I'm hearing is like the success to really combine both is to be consistent, like the way you act and behave is consistent in the company as well as the external parts.
Yeah, we're talking consistency and alignment, right? Obviously, we're not talking same behaviors, right? The
Hmm.
kind of things you do with your clients, with your customers, whatever, is not exactly the same as how you would operate internally, especially at different levels. You know, you might not talk or behave with the executives or the top management the same way throughout. I don't know. There's no reason why it should be the same, but it
Mm.
should be aligned. Like it should reinforce each other. It should speak to the same principle. And I don't want to leave you with culture becomes just a logistical thing.
Hmm.
Both the brand and the culture becomes two sides of the same coin, which is how we go about fulfilling on the strategy and the why of this company.
Right.
Yeah, and like the maybe an example I can give to like help even like painting the picture of that. Like when I my last job, when I came across the opportunity, I looked at the website and I was really compelled by everything this organization was about. I saw it and I felt it was like a spark, you know. I was like, oh, I found it. This is what I need to go and do. And I did that, right? Like I went there and got an interview and they hired me and I started working there. And on on my first day, the team was having like this massive offsite meeting that was like very reflective of what I had seen on the website. You know, it's like this
Mm.
culture of innovation, this culture of growth, and it's something that's progressive. And when I started to work there, it was consistent. So my experience as a new employee and my onboarding there was definitely, and the training I received was true to what I thought I was getting into. But
Okay.
I know of people who like start a new job, you know, and we've all heard them. They're like super excited about the new role. The interview process went well. And then like they're a week into it. They're like, this organization is a mess. I don't know if I'm gonna like it. Like everyone is stressed out. Like, and
Yeah.
it's not all what it looked like from the outside. And you step in and it's yeah, you're starting to question like, am I actually even want to be here? You know, it's not really exactly what it portrays itself as.
Mm.
um, you know, or like similarly, if you're a customer somewhere and you really like that place, and then you start working there and the experience is really different, then there's a mismatch, right? And like
Right.
it's like your staff, the team, the people who work there should be your number one brand ambassadors. And so in order for
Mm.
us to like to accomplish that, like the experience for them internally should be aligned with what we say the company is about. But there's a lot of organizations in which it's not the case. So it's
Mhm.
um,
Right.
yeah, like finding ways to realign the two so that it's humming is what we do. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome for sure. Where do you think like companies fall in that gap, the mismatch between the internal culture and the brand?
Well, I think that the culture is like a topic that can be challenging to manage for an executive team. Um, for like senior managers, like oftentimes they'll focus on, you know, like the especially if they're in like early stages or if they don't have a lot of financial stability, they'll really focus on like the heart that's pumping the blood. They'll be like, we need to focus on sales and marketing, you know,
Right.
because that's where the
Yeah.
cash come in, and we need to make sure that the finances are, you know, like the accounting is done right. And so as they do that, there's perhaps less of a focus on like developing a culture, and it can be challenging to keep track of how it evolves, because it changes as we go through time, as the organization
Yeah.
grows and develops, as it scales. It's something that's like shifting. So if you have like a team of original like people who like worked on launching the business, they might be gone in 2 years from now. So whatever like passion fueled the startup is gone with them, and now there's like
Right.
new employees that come through the doors that don't quite understand what's happening here, because if it's not been crafted intentionally in a way that's been operationalized through the group processes, through how we communicate, how do we do things around here, and if
Mm,
that those things are not branded, if they're not rooted in the values and the purpose, then it just evolves however it wants to evolve. And so like managers are sitting there and they hear phrases like culture eats strategy for breakfast, and they feel stressed out and they reach out for the plate of pastry and they like hope for the best. They just hire good people and they hope that their good people are going to figure it out, but they don't have a plan for it. Then it just does, culture does whatever culture wants to do. It's this
right.
uncontained thing. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, if I piggyback on that,
Hmm.
one place where it looks like is, um, because you ask about the pitfalls, then the pitfalls that happen when people start freaking out about culture is trying to copy paste what they've heard other people do really well.
Ah,
If you,
okay.
you think about just one tiny aspect of culture, which is meeting structure and how you open and close a meeting,
Hmm.
um, the mistake is to either copy things that exist or even think that there's the best way to do X. Like I get asked all the time, oh, as a facilitator, what do you recommend? What's the best way to open a meeting? Well, it depends. If you're Toyota and you're producing millions of cars, and if you make too many mistakes, people die,
Hmm.
you're going to have a culture that's based on precision and on exactitude of what's happening. That's not the same if you're Spotify and if you don't quickly innovate and do something cool that your users are going to run away. So you're
Mm,
going to start your meetings very differently in terms of inspiration, and what's new at Spotify will be a better match. But
okay.
if you do that, then Toyota is just weird. Toyota is not famous for innovation in their cars. You're not looking for the new gadgets when you buy a car. You're
Mm,
looking for a car that's not going to kill you when you take it on the road. So it changes. So one of the example that I think in the crowd we navigate, tech and so on, is the famous stand-up meeting. It worked
yes.
for some companies who did some very specific things, and they wrote about it. And then a bunch of people said, ooh, if that worked for them, it will work for us. And now we have so many people doing the stand-up meeting, and having participated in a bunch of different companies, most people hate them. Like there's
Hmm.
actually not that many companies for which the stand-up is an effective tool. But because it's cool and because people think that so and so company were effective with it, we should do the stand-up, even though it doesn't necessarily match what your company or your organization is up to. And then you
Interesting.
end up with these weird practices of, why do we really do a stand-up? Oh, because the owner read a book and it's cool.
Yeah. So I think it's so important to do that branding work, like to know who you are and your values
Mm,
as a company.
yeah.
And out of that, then I guess you can create the structure, set in place the structures and the protocols to facilitate that.
And here's a good example where branding, as Julie was saying, branding means more than colors. When we mean branding and culture, we don't mean a stand up with a cool name or a cool color for to match to brand to your culture. We really mean doing the thinking for what's needed here, like what's on brand. If you have a brand of where everyone works on different aspects that um, are highly interdependent of each other, a
Hmm.
stand-up might be a good idea, because if your project is a little bit behind, it means mine will, and we really need to hear from each other. In a more traditional company where you have your salespeople over there and your marketing people over there,
Hmm.
they don't really need to hear from each other. It sounds cute on the surface, but it doesn't match with the way the organization is organized. And then you hear these things where people hear from other people they don't really care about, like, oh, you're behind on your project. Well, good for you. I mean, what do I know?
Yeah.
Doesn't impact me tomorrow. Do you want a hug? You know,
Right.
it just becomes weird. Like people don't know what to do with that information. So by branding culture, we don't just mean like applying some cool colors. We really mean doing the thinking but the culture is on brand. Like it delivers on what the market needs, aligned with the strategy and the reason why we exist in the first place.
That's awesome. Just a quick reminder for everyone who's watching, you guys have questions, just don't forget to post it in there, and we'll start to answer it in a quick little bit. Do you guys have any advice for like designers who want, maybe Julie, you can touch on this, how want to get involved into branding? How do you approach that?
Sure. If for designers, I think who have like an understanding of human-centric design and data-informed design, that's a huge head start. I think in that branding leads into the world of marketing and needing to have these research tools and like ways to understand the needs of the users is like essentially it's really similar work, right? It's interesting how they'll call them like focus groups in marketing, and it might be like slightly different language in design, but it's user research, it's all the same stuff, right? So I think for designers who are in UX and they do experience design and they have this tool belt of understanding how to do data-driven design, there's a lot of overlap there with branding strategy and being able to understand what the needs are and positioning it in a way that is like empathetic and related, like the offering is related to the needs of the users. And similarly, to do market research, it's oftentimes similar tools that are used. So from a brand strategy perspective, if you're a designer, you already have a lot of tools in your toolkit that you can leverage. And then if you're a graphic designer, I mean, the obvious like way in, and if you're a graphic designer, you've probably dabbled into branding before, but then like expand beyond your ability to create cohesive visual systems and become curious about like what are we saying with this visual system, and how do we articulate this through words, and why are we saying this, and understanding the bigger picture, right? Like really like broadening the scope of what you're working on, because logo design is like a very specific type of design, right? Like a friend of mine was like sharing with me, she's a designer, and she's like, I get really stressed out when I do logo design, because it's like you have to be so precise and it has to be so perfect that like it's just you're never done looking at it, and it's this very like it can get to be a lot, right? And you get in your head about it, and it's
very
like, okay, well,
detailed.
that's the kind of brand work that you do, and you're curious to like expand and understand like branding and like the broader sense of it, then it's about becoming curious to understand how like how successful businesses are built, like, and understanding what the need is, and how like the founder like created a solution that met those needs, and so it's like zoom out of like Illustrator or Sketch or whatever it is that you use, and have a look at the bigger picture, and get involved, ask questions. If you're working on the team and you're like a designer who's like starting, you're like an intermediate designer and working with like creative director or like marketing directors, and like a senior team, is just about like ask questions, throw in ideas, and like they'll even in like I learned a lot about branding, but by formatting brand books. I wasn't doing the strategic work at that point, but I was like working with a creative director who and like strategists that would put the brand strategy together, and they'd be like, here you go, Julie, can you format it? And I would format the deck, and just by looking at that, just like slowly started to really learn about branding and what goes into it. It's not just about picking the colors, right? It's a lot more than that, and it's such an interesting field. So that's what I would say. Yeah.
So just expanding your horizons and look at the bigger picture and how each component, whether it's the logo or the colors or the messaging, how it's all connected. That's kind of like the overarching brand approach. Okay.
Yeah, and the business strategy behind it, like the strategic aspect of it is, and then how do is it actually reflected in the experience of the customer? So taking a look at those 4 elements, right, of branding is where it can help with learning and getting into it. Yeah.
Awesome. So good. Thank you. And yeah, for those who are watching, David, if you can share like if any advice if people want to get into organizational like culture development work, what kind of things can they do?
Mm. That's a vast field, and there's so many ways to enter the field. There's the theoretical approach by having expertise in behavioral psychology, behavioral economics. There's different approaches there. I think people are now interested in people who can authentically engage with people. There's an interest in people who can be authentic and real with people. So whatever you can work on. I mean, there's people who've trained themselves as coaches, as facilitators. I come from the world of education. I'm a converted mathematician and teacher myself. But I think that the point is getting interested in human beings, and I think anything around that theme of engagement, you can't go wrong. If you get interested and you get good at what translates in engagement, whether it be in presentations, in workshops, and on the workplace with the clients, that's what people are interested in. Not just understanding people like machines, but what makes people tick. If you can't connect to that, is going to be difficult. And my recommendation is go get yourself trained in a bunch of different things. I've been trained in leadership development and coaching and facilitation and training. Like, go do a bunch of stuff, work with people, find ways to engage with people. So far, that's what worked for me, and that has me get work is I have something that people find valuable to say about what's going to have people take and work with each other more effectively.
That's awesome. I remember you saying planning birthday parties is a good example, so maybe they should start with that. That's awesome. Yeah, sorry.
What you said, yeah, go organize some birthday party. No, that's true. Like if you can't put a little event together, like event management, event planning can be the access. I know people who do culture management now who start in the event planning world. Yeah, that's totally true.
Awesome. All right, I'm gonna sift through some of the questions. We got some pretty good ones here.
How many people are online?
I'm not sure right now because I have the screen full screen, but I think we have quite a bit.
We don't know how many of you there are.
There's yeah, I'm not sure at the moment. Okay, so Zarif, he says, you mentioned the importance of data. Have you guys been able to find or create a framework to measure the quantitative results of implementing the culture and branding shift? That's a pretty
juicy. From Zarif?
Zarif.
I think that's Zarif I know. I hope it is. If not, that's fine too. Not yet. I think the short answer is that's what we're working on currently.
Okay.
We have a lot of ideas. We have a lot of experience working with some of the bits, but to have a comprehensive framework for the moment is what we're working on. So not yet. And when we do, we'll keep it a secret. No, I don't know. We'll start telling people what we do with it, but we're not quite there where it's systematized and a comprehensive framework.
Okay.
Yeah, we have like some high level ideas in the 4 buckets of like types of like the measures that we want to have pulse on, but have not yet developed like the toolkit that will enable us to like collect the data. And I think that this will come as we start to do the work as well. Like oftentimes we develop work in the flow of we develop our tools in the flow of work, and so I think that's given that it is like quite granular, that's where I think it will make a lot of sense for us to dive into that in even more depth when we start using the tool.
And the problem with automating.
Say
that word?
Automation?
Yeah, that word. The problem with that thing is that you can't have everything fit in the same box. So a 50 people company will have different kinds of metrics and different kind of things you're going to look at than 100 people, 1,000 people, 10,000 people, and so on. And people in the food industry will also have different sort of, even in their culture, things you look at than people who are in the logistical consulting industry. So there's also a little bit of a problem of trying to like make things. There's going to be some amount of customization that needs to be done.
Gotcha. Okay. Ben Silverstein, good to see you. He asks, how would you supplement physical user research, such as contextual inquiries and or focus groups observations under pandemic restrictions, as the need for user observation and methods like think loud are priceless?
Well, it's interesting because David and I were chatting before the call, and David's been busier than ever now the pandemic hit, right? Like there's like more and more activity, and like he was sharing with me that he before the pandemic like preferred not to do like work remotely or with teams digitally given the nature of the work, but he's discovering that that he's getting a lot of like positive results and is like positively surprised with like the quality of the experience. And I think that when it comes to like doing research and when we think about like contextual inquiry, like I mean like contextual inquiry has to be contextual, right? So like in that like currently the context is the way that the context is currently, and so this is something that we'd have to work with. And then with other like methods and tools, there's just so many that are available online that enables for research and collaboration, and still doing, for example, like a few weeks ago I used optimal sort to do some like card sorting, and it was amazing, like just the like the amount of insights that I got from a digital tool, whereas like normally would do it in person like as a workshop. I was concerned that I wouldn't get as much from the research, but I got just different type of data that was just as valuable, right? So I think with each of those methods, we still have an opportunity to go about it. We just have to be like flexible and adapt to the context that is currently around us. And I think there's a solution for anything. We just have to be creative in our approach and resourceful in knowing the tools. And that's what's exciting about the work that we're going to be doing. Also, is working with different teams in seeing how they've adapted, and also bringing in new ideas for how remote work can be done, right? Because there's still decisions that need to happen. Even though you're on Zoom, there's still problems to solve. And so all that work is still very relevant.
Awesome. That's great. So some of us are, a lot of us, we're kind of like reassessing the way we're doing life now, and we're doing work. Everyone's working from home and stuff like that, and we're just setting up new systems. So do you have any advice for those who want to like transform their home culture environment in a way that can incorporate like their work in it? So like work-life balance and things like that. We're talking about like analyzing the culture, but can we apply it for homes, and how do we fit that with work?
I'm just gonna start. I noticed, so David and I've been working pretty closely together in the past few months, and I've noticed the physical environment of his office changing a little bit every day. Have you been doing the home improvement work?
I have. I've been experimenting a lot with the office. I have been doing some thinking about, if I'm going to spend that much time on Zoom, what kind of setup do you want to create for that? But
it's a good backdrop. If you got the cool light, the hipster light bulb.
Yeah, you like it? Where is it?
I'm kind of ashamed now. I should probably block my mess.
That's new. You didn't have that before.
Well, I mean, I think that question is a great example to be consistent with what Julie and I have been talking about, which is that there's no one size fits all answer to this question about work-life balance. See, depending on the strategy you have, even if you work alone as an independent, depending on the strategy you work on, there's a certain brand you're creating in terms of how accessible you are, how responsive you are, how stressed out and how quick you're going to turn around certain projects. And the way in which you want to work at home and the way you want to set up whatever workspace you have access to, practices, routines, like do you work early in the morning, do you work the whole day, do you take breaks, all of that should be consistent with sort of your strategy and your brand, like the way you want to communicate to people. So um, these days I'm working personally on being available and being of service to people and demonstrating that we can have things put together and deliver online high value work. Well, I'm looking at my office and making it work, and looking at my schedule, that if I want to be of service and provide high value to people, I'm working a little hard in the morning, and as
Right.
much as I can, then at some point calling it an end at the end of the day, so I can spend some time with my wife and my housemates. So there's whatever works for me. And mostly because I'm always interested in innovation and experimenting, I have to say my schedule has changed a lot. My office has changed a lot because I'm practicing, I'm experimenting, and I'm trying new things. But that's consistent with my brand. That's consistent with what I'm offering to people, is that I've been trying things. You might not be in a place where you want to tell people you're experimenting with that. Maybe it's just a waste of your time. You should focus on something else that's consistent with your brand, your strategy.
How about you, Julie? Like, has your process changed now that you're at home more, and how does that affect your work?
Well, I think I had a head start, much like Andrew, I think in the
Yeah.
past couple of episodes ago was sharing. I was working from home and adapted to, working on adapting to work from home for the past few months. Um, and it's been a really interesting experiment of discovering and exploring with like where how do I set create boundaries versus let myself find a natural flow, right? That's the dimension I'm experimenting with, is like, how rigid do I want to be versus, like, go with the flow of like, okay, now feels like the right time for me to work, or like I'm hungry so I'm going to eat, versus like having a very rigid structure. And so I
Yeah.
experiment with both. I have like on my very like when I'm very busy, or when I have like a high volume of work, I tend to like create a lot of structure,
Okay.
and I'll work in like very precise, like clockwork 45-minute sprints. And then after 45 minutes, I have an alarm that goes off,
Nice.
and I'll go do the dishes, take the trash out, and fold my clothes. And then like I'm back at it 10 minutes later in hyper focus, and I'll do another 45 minutes like this, right? And then I'll go and do like push-ups and sit-ups, and then I start again. And it's like every time it's like I have a very like fresh mind when I sit down at my desk again, right? So it's like, okay, today I'm gonna do 7 of those sprints or 8 of those sprints, and at the end of the day, my house is gonna be squeaky clean, and I will have worked out, and it's a good system. It works for me when I have high volume of work. And when I have less work, is about like giving myself the freedom and the space to slow things down a little bit, and not make myself wrong for that. Just be like, no, this is great. Actually, today I'm gonna work for a couple hours, send a couple emails, and then I'm gonna pick up a book and go for a bike ride and go and read it on a like park bench somewhere and like soak up the sun, right? So it's experimenting with both that I'm doing that I'm doing right now. So I'd say like there's it seems like it's worth trying a lot of different things and being deliberate about it too, and being like, okay, this week I'm going to try something a little bit different, because last week I noticed that XYZ, and creating the time to plan at the beginning of each week, like what am I trying in terms of my ways of working this week that's different than last week.
I love that. That's so good. It'll be really interesting how people will go back to work, or like the office structure, after being in this kind of fluid environment. I'm curious, like, do you have a regular routine or rhythm, like how you start your day, or review it at night? Just because your days could fluctuate. Sometimes it's very structured, and sometimes it's very relaxed. So do you have a rhythm just to check in to see, okay, what's ahead and then plan accordingly?
Yeah, for me, it's really in the morning, like just that like hour and a half of like just giving myself the space to enjoy the morning and drink my coffee, read a book that is not about anything business related, and then like have a moment to clear my headspace
Mm,
and be intentional about how I'm going to be um, experiencing my day, right? um, yeah, morning is like sacred for me. I'm a morning person. And then like that's the
okay.
great thing too, is that it's when I'm like the most productive as well. So I'll have like that's like 1 hour where I'm just like really letting myself ease into the day, and then I'm like super hardcore, like
Game
8
time.
a.m. just like crush through it for a few hours, and yeah, it's good.
That's awesome.
What about you, David?
Morning two is, I've discovered that with the pandemic schedule, I go to bed way earlier than I used to, and I
Oh,
wake
interesting.
up. I'm up super early, like somewhere between 5:30 and 6. I'm like up, so
Wow.
I'm in my office by 7, and I really like having a couple hours before 9 or 10 o'clock where I'm not going to touch emails. I really can catch up on work, look at what's important,
Mm,
plan my day, and then between 9 and 2 I'll do the bulk of my work, and then after 2 it's a giveaway. I mean, it's like I don't care as much after 2 o'clock. I schedule my meetings after 2 because I don't want to do hard intellectual work after 2.
yeah.
So I protect the consequences. I protect my time before 2 o'clock against meetings very ferociously. And
Mm,
because it's just the prime time for me to work on my stuff. Was the afternoon, I can chat with people and you
mm.
know have conversations till as late as you want, but I won't be able to work alone as effectively.
Yeah, I've been kind of shifting my schedule to that too, trying to get up early and then use my focus like energy in the morning and then do all my social meetings and stuff in the afternoon because I think that for me that charges me up. So, yeah, that's pretty interesting. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you guys want to share or say? I've gained so much value and I really appreciate you guys
Well,
sharing
thank
tonight.
you for inviting us, for having this conversation, and for moderating with the question. I love that we got some questions, and it's been fun for me. I hope it's been valuable for the people watching.
Yeah, I think so, for sure.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. And since you're inviting us to, we do have an upcoming workshop on May 13th. So if you're curious to learn about it, go on our website, hyperminds.io.
Okay.
If you think that, like there's opportunities for us to work together, if you want to learn more about our approach, have a look at that. And like, thank you so much, Josh, for having us. And thanks everyone whose faces I don't see for stopping by, and looking forward to catching up on the other end of COVID.
Awesome. Yeah, people are saying thank you. Andrew says hi and he misses you
Hi,
guys.
Andrew.
A few other people as well. So, Elliot Mayer, who else? Kevin, Anvit,
Kevin,
Jessica, Karina is watching. So that's great.
so good, so
Yeah,
good.
thank you so much, guys. All right, so I'm just gonna wrap it up. All right. All right, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed today's session. If you guys want to find out more about David and Julie and Hyperminds, here's the link, and I'll add it more in the description. So for tomorrow, we have one talk lined up. We have a special guest, Hivi Serdar. She has been with us twice now, and so this will be her third time joining us. So she's going to talk about balance and productivity and mental health. So that'll be at 8 o'clock tomorrow. Looking forward for you guys to join us tomorrow. All right. Have a good evening. Have a lovely rest, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Take care.